Chapter 16. The Hero and the Calamity. Two princesses there were in Varuda, one who died for the other, and the other who wished desperately that she had been the one to make that sacrifice. Zelda's choked sobs had finally begun to taper off, receding to wounded whimpers as she leaned into Mipha's embrace, and Paya, alongside Sidon, had only been able to stand back and wait during this display of deep-set grief she had neither the knowledge nor the perspective to understand. Sidon who had fought the water blight with his spear and then with his bare hands, Sidon who had waited a century to find his sister again and was now confronted only with her ghost, stood watching like a sentry, and it was not just the particulars of his Zoran features that made his expression impossible for Paya to read. That he was able to be so patient now, that he was able to give Zelda space for a grief she only half remembered, that he had not immediately run to his sister. All these things spoke to a fortitude of the spirit that Paya did not think she could ever possess. She was not shying away from him. Now, maybe she would have if he looked at her. Maybe the weight of his attentions would have sent her scurrying into the dark. But as it stood she found herself admiring him, his patience and his calm and his empathy. This is why his people love him.
I have been trapped here since that day a century ago,
Mipha said, as much to the two of them as to Zelda.
Many were the days where my heart began to waver, and I wondered if perhaps I would never be free. But you came for me. The three of you have made my hopes into a reality.
Sister, Sidon said, and his voice was strange in a way that ran counter to what Paya expected out of him.
I would speak with you, if I may.
He paused, then, his attention going to his feet before returning to his sister's face.
Or, that's what I want to say. I spent decades wondering what I would say to you if we met again. Now that you're in front of me, it's all slipped away.
Mipha smiled at him, plainly amused.
The years have changed you very little, in some ways. But I think perhaps they have changed me even less. I spent years thinking of you too, Sidon. Conversations that lasted for days, listening to you tell me all the stories of your life. If I were to take the spirit of what I hope to communicate to you, to parse it down to its most essential element.
Her posture changed, in a way that Paya could not tell the meaning of, but Sidon's changed in response.
I am so proud of who you have become, Sidon. You're even stronger than I hoped you would be.
Mipha bore no shame for her tears. She neither tried to restrain them nor hide them, rejecting all artifice.
I am so glad that I was able to speak to you again.
Sidon nodded, unlike his sister. His emotions seemed to choke him, and he did not speak.
I am only a spirit. Now, my healing powers are wasted on me. So, if you would, I wish you to have them.
Zelda looked up, then, at last broken out of whatever place she had retreated to, and she looked too tired to be wounded.
They will protect you when things are at their most dire, and I hope that they will be a comfort to you when the world is at its most dark. Please accept them.
There was a light in the Zora princess's chest, and she drew it forth with her fingers. It was soft and blue and held in it the same gentle radiance that she had used to heal Sidon of his wounds. She knelt before Zelda, and Zelda's hands were shaking as they reached out for it. For all the world it looked like a jewel passing between them, and Zelda took the jewel in her hands before pulling it against her own chest, where the light sank in. It did not disappear, leaving in the air a faint luminescence, the sound of little bells, the smell of clean waters. Zelda held her hands to her chest, still, as Mipha rose to her feet once more.
I must take my leave, now, and begin preparations with Ruta. When the time comes, we will strike at the darkness. We will annihilate Ganon together.
She meant it, and that fact more than any other struck Paya like a blow. No one knew how the champions had died, exactly, but everyone knew that they had. Now she thought she understood better the pain, the enormity of what the champions had been made to suffer, to be willing to return to the battle after that, to face off again with the primordial darkness that had killed and imprisoned them for so long. There was no understanding such devotion, such courage. But I wish to, she thought, and that is everything I wish to be. Light engulfed her, light the color of gold, and she realized that she was being sent away. Sidon, engulfed in the same light, realized at the same moment, and called out,
Mipha! What should I tell father?
Mipha walked toward them, not toward Sidon but toward Paya, though her eyes were on her brother.
Tell him that I am sorry for making him worry. Tell him that I am free, and happy, and I will see our kingdom saved from the darkness. Tell him I always followed my heart.
Paya felt her face reddening as the Zor princess stalked in front of her, rising higher so their faces were level. She first stock still as Miffa leaned in, lips newly touching Paya's ear, and then said in tones so low that no one else might hear, "You should, Tia." The light swallowed her, and Paya was gone from that place of water and tears. Paya and said and disappeared, as if transformed into motes of golden light that rose into the sky and away from Varruta. Zelda watched them go, realizing that she was not with them, and that teleportation looked a very great deal like her power. Perhaps I could do that. Perhaps I do not need the shake slate at all. It was a thought she latched onto, a raft in the storm. Then she was alone on Varruta, alone with the woman who had died for her. The warmth of the healing power, Miffa's grace, she thought the name though she had not heard it, was still inside of her, like a star sitting next to her heart, and it made her feel safe and balanced, and if not more in control of herself then at least able to pretend. Zelda had seen Miffa whisper something to Paya. She could not guess at what it had been and would never ask. Shame, more than propriety, denied her.
"Miffa,"
she said to the ghost's back, and Miffa did not turn in response to her, so she continued anyway.
"Why am I still here? There is something I have to show you,"
the dead woman said, and from anyone else's mouth it might have been menacing, but from Miffa's there was only regret and hope and fear and shame.
"Will you let me?"
She left Zelda an avenue of escape, and from that Zelda understood two things, that whatever this was would hurt her, and that Miffa loved her enough to want to spare her from it despite the necessity. Was it memory or a deeper, more essential element of her heart that felt that love and demanded she answer it?
Yes.
The newly revealed light of the sun was blocked out as the entrances to Varruta closed, and the divine beast roared in a sound not far removed from joy as it drew into itself. Then they moved, and Zelda felt the floor shift beneath her, and she reached down into the god's power, broadening her awareness, sending it outward and into the world beyond the divine beast. How bright the world, how clear outside of Varruta, how she felt the rays of the sun though they did not fall on her skin, the pure water of the reservoir like a cauldron of diamonds as Varruta dove into it. Varruta is being changed as it submerged, moving through the water without disturbing it and at a speed that should have been impossible for something of its size and its bulk. It was as if the water itself was not just a medium through which it moved but a wholly separate world that it occupied. Swiftly did they move, flitting out of the reservoir, down waterfalls, along the lengths of rivers wide and narrow, and up the side of the mountains that ringed in Zor's domain. Where water flowed, so too could Varruta, and when it burst from the shallows it needed walk only a little further to crest the massive mountain at the western end of that range. It bellowed its challenge to the calamity, lifting its trunk, and its capacitors warmed up as the targeting laser focused on the keep of Hyrule Castle. The outer layers of Varruta opened, and the sun shone down on Zelda again. It was warm, wonderfully warm, warm in a way that sent warmth through her whole being, and she allowed herself a moment to draw on it for strength and comfort. During the entire trip, for those several minutes, Miffa had not looked at her. Her expression had been distant, as if drawn far away, and now Zelda really looked and saw that she was looking to the west, to Hyrule Castle, to Ganon. "What I am about to show you," the champion's voice was quiet but firm, "the decision already made,
is not meant to drive you to haste. I need you to understand that, before we begin. If we are to have any hope of defeating Ganon, then you must gather your strength. Restore as much of your memory as you can. Marshal all of the goddess's power that you can possibly control. Free the divine beasts. Everything that you feel you need to do. Ganon is so much worse than it was a century ago. Princess, we will need every possible advantage if we hope to see it defeated."
Aced. Yes, she had been thinking of that, hadn't she, in the further recesses of her mind. There was something there as they had done battle with Varruta, as they had faced the blight that had conquered it and killed Miffa. How much worse must things be in other places? And worst of all, Ganon? Hurry. Hurry to Hyrule Castle. Make straight for there, if you can, for time is the most terrible of your enemies.
My father's spirit said to me that the hero's strength was nearly gone. Hylia told me that we were nearly out of time. I do not believe that.
Miffa's words cut across her own, not dismissive but insistent, the words of someone who genuinely knew better, and the force of them was different from everything she had said up to now.
Ganon's strength grows, but Link will not fail. He will hold for as long as he is needed.
Then, quietly,
He promised.
You seem so sure, Zelda said, and the curiosity was rising in her, now. How relieving to let it shoulder past her grief, to push to the forefront of her mind and insist that this was the place where it most belonged.
How can your faith be so absolute? How can your faith in him be so strong, knowing what he is facing?
Still Mepha did not face her.
We were champions. All 5 of us still share some connection between us, even in death. I have watched him from my prison for the past 100 years. From him I drew my faith that we would see release. So long as he fought, there was still hope.
But,
Princess,
Mepha was shaking, the outline of her spirit quivering though the image of her remained solid.
You must see to understand. May I show you?
She was enshrouded in the power of Hylia. In answer she reached out, mingling her awareness with Mepha's. There was so much sorrow there, so much regret, so much pain that it threatened to overwhelm her, to be more than her goddess mind could bear, an ocean of it, and that ocean swept her away. No malice lay about the grounds of Hyrule Castle, corroding the fabric of a world around it. No monsters walked its halls. Guardians roamed or sat in silent vigil, waiting for invaders that had not wandered near in decades. The sky was dark, crackling with energy that emanated from the calamity as it did battle, but it exerted no effort in trying to infect the world around it. All its strength was turned inward. A brilliant green light shone from the highest tower, as if battling the storm of darkness. There was also no silence there, anywhere that one stood in Hyrule Castle, or even as far away as the shattered remnants of Castle Town. One could hear echoes of conflict. The ringing of steel was underscored by the roar of powers unleashed, darkness leveled against the sword that would seal it, the exultation of a voice more ancient than the calamity itself. Down, then, starting at the sanctum, where the throne of the kings and queens of Hyrule lay in pieces, one could cast one's awareness into the enormous pit that opened in its floor, down into the foundations of the earth beneath the castle, into the enormous chamber where the hero waged his war. The Master Sword plunged into the calamity's throat, cutting its roar short, and Link tore the blade away in a spray of fire and darkness. Ganon bellowed, its shifting form staggering. The killer blow landed against it. Link landed on the ground, backed away as it fell to its knees. It looked at him with eyes, first dozens and then hundreds and then only 2, that oscillated between orange and purple and golden before settling on yellow like fire. It hit the ground on its face, the impact shaking the chamber in which they stood and the entirety of the castle above them, and its body burst into flames. Link staggered, then, and fell to his knee, the weight of mountains settling on him. His blood pooled beneath him, not from wounds opened by Ganon but by protestations of his flesh, a rejection of the work he asked of it. He breathed in heavy, ragged gasps, his body shuddering with the effort of each inhalation, but he did not fall. The Master Sword stick, burning with the blood and hatred of its most terrible enemy, dug into the floor as the hero held himself up by its hilt. He did not fall. The fire of the calamity's body danced and sang and burned and swelled as its physical form shattered and faded to nothing. The eyes of the beasts, twin suns that hurt to gaze upon, floated there in the flames. They never looked away from the hero, took in every moment of his weakness, of his pain, seeming to measure him. Ganon did not roar. Instead the fire drew into itself, swirling more brightly and intensely as it condensed, and finally it settled on the floor. If one looked at it from the hero's perspective, one would have seen it as a nearly formless silhouette of fire and darkness, staring with golden eyes bereft of feeling or expression. The hero did not look up. There was quiet in the hall, for that brief time.
There have been changes since last we spoke.
The beast within the fire whispered, and its whisper suggested that if it shouted then the world would break.
Would you hear of them?
Link spoke not. He breathed, and held on to his sword, and waited.
She is finally on the move again. I admit. Surprise.
It was not surprise that coated its words in venom, that made the walls shake and the earth groan beneath them.
I was so sure she was dead, that you had left her corpse to cool on the grass when you challenged me, but she is returned.
The fires had no face, no hands, no shoulders, not a single part that would betray body language common to monster or beast or humanity, but still it shifted, still it seemed to grow more agitated.
All this time, I thought you were only delaying me, and that the battle was over save for you. All this time, I had assumed that time was on my side. Yet here we are, and it is growing sure.
No reaction. Did the hero even hear? Did the calamity care?
I respect you, you know. I always have, though I did not always show it. To take up arms against a power greater than yourself, to seize the strength of the gods to make the world that you desire, that is worthy of respect.
It was not respect that shifted the fire, that made that voice rise above a whisper, that made the walls echo with the growls of a beast too vast to tread the earth.
But it doesn't matter. None of it matters. The two of you against me were not enough before, and while you two are so greatly reduced I am so much more than I was. Can you feel it, I wonder, how my strength builds and returns? Can you feel me?
The calamity paused, its gaze never wavering.
I am wasting my words. Let us see if you will live, this time.
The attack of the water blight, when leveled against a person's will, was invisible to the naked eye, not so the power of the true form of Canaan. Between the flames of the beast and the crouched form of the hero the air was alive with fire and darkness. Ropes of virulent hatred so concentrated they were like an undying curse waving in the air, reaching for the prone form of the hero. Still he did not respond. Maybe, then, he truly did not see them there. Then the calamity's power was upon him, and he screamed with all the force of his body, an ear-splitting howl so pained that half a country away one princess tried to cover her ears against it while the other listened with the resignation of someone who had suffered this before. He writhed, his body spasming, muscles seizing as the power of the beast flowed into him, through him, and when he screamed the power arced between his teeth like bolts of black lightning. The earth shuddered beneath them, so much strength did the calamity pour into the hero that the runoff flowed away to the ground itself, seeking channels through which to rush out and restore the darkness that had walked the land. Ganon struck, and the earth bled, and the hero screamed. The golden eyes set within the fire showed nothing at all, but perhaps the spirit behind them smiled. Still the hero did not fall. The master's sword was chipped and pitted, its edge worn down in places, rust betraying its integrity in others. The malice danced across it, too, seeking to eat away at the blade as it ate away at the hero, for did not the stories claim that the sword and its master were one, two halves of a single soul, and that to destroy one would destroy the other? So Ganon attacked it, too, and in that hall, one could hear metal creaking. And then a single bright, clean note, accompanied by the radiance of a terrible blue light. The light shone from the blade of the sword, pushing back the malice, and the hero's scream stopped. The flow of the malice was stymied not at all, the killing intent of the calamity was redoubled, and then more, as the weapon forged in the fires of the gods pushed back against it. The note rose and rose and rose, the dawning call of the gods, the ringing of a bell, a single voice that was the instrument of dragon song. The space behind the wall of blue light pushing back Ganon's power was empty, and then the spirit of the sword winked into physical existence. None remained who knew her as she had been before, none remained who would be able to say how she had been changed. Her lustrous blue skin, once gleaming like polished steel, had grown dull and discolored in a long battle with the calamity. The robes that hung down from her shoulders, recalling arms or even wings, were tattered and rusted. The shape of her head, which had once suggested hair and helmet both, had shifted, blurring down into a mantle that protected her torso, and this was necessary, as that mantle was pitted and gouged more severely than the blade of the sword. Only her voice, raised in the song that she had sung for the hero in an age before ages, was unchanged. How Ganon hated her, how the fires raged, and its growling built to a howl, drowning out the long note of her song. "Master," said she, in a voice older than Ganon, a voice that made the hero look up, "please rise. Her grace will be with us soon." Ganon's howl grew more terrible, the force of its attack turning into a storm, and now there was no runoff. Now the strength to shatter worlds and rewrite history was being concentrated into a single terrible point, a typhoon of darkness in which stood a man and the spirit of the sword that had judged him worthy. "Rise. You are the hero fit to serve her grace, and you cannot fall here. Your duty is not yet fulfilled." The sound of Link's fingers tightening against the hilt of his weapon was small in that maelstrom. "Yours is the sword that will seal the darkness. Yours is the spirit unbreakable. Rise, rise, my master, and take up the blade that is yours by right. Face the darkness. For Hyrule, for life, for Zelda. Rise." How old the song of the hero in ages long past, ages forgotten to mortal and gods alike. She had sung it at the behest of the goddess. Now she sang in the language of the old gods, in a voice that shook the foundations of the heavens, so that Link might hear the call of his own soul. It did not strengthen him, that was not the power of the song. Still his blood pooled beneath him, still his body threatened to fail him, still his limbs shook and his breath came in ragged, gulping gasps. but he heard it, and he heaved himself to his feet, the master sword raised in his hands. Fi reached the last notes and, smiling, vanished. The light came from the sword, but it was his light, too, and as the power of the calamity leveled all its fury against him, he stood unshaking in the center of the maelstrom. It did not touch him, it could not.
Nothing is unbreakable.
The fires roared as the enormous chamber shook and danced around them.
Not this place. Not that sword. Not you.
The fires shifted, rose, expanded, beginning to fill some new shape.
I only need to win once, hero. You will fail, your time grows short, too. Your spirit will buckle. I will not fail,
the hero said, his voice quiet in that chamber even as the maelstrom died, all the power of the beast being recalled into the flames which swelled and darkened.
I will hold you here. I will hold you until they come for me, and for you.
The shadow grew, and grew, and grew, as Ganon crafted its own shape.
I won't let you hurt them. Who?
Ganon whispered, towering over the hero.
Do you seek so desperately to protect?
He was still gasping, barely able to speak the words, pausing for breath between each name.
Urbosa. Dark. Metha. Rivali.
He swallowed.
Zelda.
Finally, he made eye contact with the beast.
You won't touch any of them.
The raging of the maelstrom as it was pulled back into Ganon's body, the buckling of stone under its hoofs, the hiss of metal as it lightly dragged its swords across each other, the howling of the earth, full to bursting with its evil, none of these were so terrible, so world-shattering, as the thunder of Ganon's laughter. It did not speak the words. Its laughter reached a shrieking crescendo, and it swung its swords, falling to battle once more. The sound of steel ringing in that hall drowned out the world. Zelda came back to her body, then, and fell to her hands and knees, nearly collapsing altogether. Hadley, he is in so much pain, and she could not go further than that. There was a barrier in her soul that would not let her confront everything that she had seen, everything she had heard. Ow, she said, and looked up at Mipha, who was clear-eyed and dry-faced in a way that she herself was definitely not.
For 100 years, he... How? Faith.
The dead princess answered.
And duty. He has always been dutiful, even when he was very small, and he has always been faithful, too. They are armor that protects his heart, and they allow him to push himself up, even when... Mipha? Even when he suffers. Even when he is all alone. Hylia is wrong, and your father is wrong, and Ganon is wrong. He will never break. For 100 years or 10,000, he will fight for us. For you. He will never fall. He'll just... Sava.
Another long pause.
He forgets what happened to us. He forgets that day, as if the fight is all he's ever known of Ganon. Because if he allowed himself to remember, he...
Mipha could not get the words out. Instead, for the first time since sending Paya and Sidon away, she looked at Zelda, and Zelda saw that she had been wrong to think her calm.
You must save him, Pentas.
She thought of Link in that place, facing down the end of the world with nothing but a sword and the strength of his will. Link who had protected her from death. Link who had borne the burden of war in her place for a century. She was supposed to save him? It was preposterous. How could she even need someone like that, much less save them from battle?
Please,
Mipha said, and her tone was still controlled, but at the edge of her words it began to fray, as if something were about to unravel inside of her.
You must. You saw how he fights, how he suffers. So many times he has struck down Ganon, and so many times he has suffered the same ministrations. My death was as nothing compared to what he is experiencing.
Her hands balled into fists.
I know. You loved him, once. That love gave rise to your power. Please. No matter what it takes, or how hard it becomes.
Then something else inside of her changed and her red hands fell loose.
I will be with you. I will add my part to yours, however I may. But please, Princess.
There was a golden light, and it was hers but not hers, and she could feel herself leaving that place, and she did not have time to cry out, only to hear.
Please save him.
Mipha was alone on Vah Ruta, and it was quiet in that place. No Zelda, no Sidon, and after 100 years there was no Ganon. What a storm whirled within her, thoughts of her brother and her father and of Zelda, but she could center herself. Now she was alone, at last. She had controlled herself in front of Zelda, not perfectly, but she could not demand perfection of herself. Not for this. Not for the enormity of what she was experiencing. For 100 years she had watched him, the lacerations in his flesh and the failing of his body. For 100 years she had been helpless to reach out to him, unable to lend him aid. For 100 years her promise to him had been made into a lie. Maybe now, at the end, she might be of some help to him. She had to believe that there was nothing else to believe. Casting her sight to the depths of that pit, she returned to her vigil. She would not look away. Alone, at last, she allowed herself to weep for him. End of chapter.